is we passed July 5th. July 5th, important, I guess, because that's the last time Terry McLaurin signed a contract extension. It was July 5th of 2022, I believe it was. And that is the 3-year extension, or the 3 years coming up at the end of this one where that will expire. So he has 1 year remaining on his deal. Typically, when you're a star player in the league, anyone that it's not obvious your contract is going to expire, and you're like kind of at the end of your road with the current team, you get an extension. That's how this works. It is kind of just how business is done in the league. And we know that the Commanders and Adam Peters are negotiating with Terry because Adam has told us so. The last we saw Terry, where was he? I know he was at the Eastern Conference Finals, and then he posted from somewhere last week. I think he was fishing.
He was in Europe, I'm pretty sure.
And then I think he was in Europe. So, like, Terry doesn't seem super bothered. At least that's what he's putting out on Instagram. You can be in Europe and also bothered by your American football contract, but he has at least not stopped living his life, as he should not. He missed mandatory minicamp, and we're now on the verge of 2-3 weeks away. Camp starts, and are we going to get a holdout or a hold in? I know Kevin did a segment earlier today that was kind of like, are you Team Terry or Team Commanders on this? And what I would say is, I think it's a great idea for sports talk radio because one of the great things we can do if we want to generate calls and rile people up and invoke emotion is, I'm not saying Kevin was doing this to be manipulative, just to be clear, but you want heroes and villains. Like, that makes for better stories. Who's the hero? Who's the villain? And because of that, and because of where we are, I just disagree with the premise that I am team one or the other. I am team get a bleeping deal done. And I don't think it's that hard. I have kind of, but also, of course, what I think Terry's value is and what the team thinks and what Terry thinks or his representation thinks might be 3 totally different numbers, in which case, like, should we just pick the one in the middle and be done? Do you keep negotiating? Like, I just think it's kind of really clear where he fits on the wide receiver hierarchy and kind of how the business goes and what the timeline is for the Commanders. And at that, because I don't know what the offers have been that have been thrown back and forth, it's really hard for me to say, like, I am Team Terry or I am Team Commanders. And on an even deeper level, Anthony, I am like, I don't know what team this puts me on, but them getting a deal done is important. I guess here's what I would say. I feel like it's more important for the Commanders than it is to Terry. And that is not discounting that Terry has somewhere between like $40 and $100 million on the line, right? Terry has not really life-changing money for him in the here and now because he's already signed a big deal. But Terry's great-grandchildren like really care about this deal. And like from a status standpoint, obviously you care about it. It is a big deal. You know, these careers are short. Not that you can't live off the kind of money that Terry's made, especially because I don't think he's the most extravagant person ever. But you certainly like not going to sneeze at tens of millions of dollars. And like when I say tens, somewhere north of 40, 50, 60 in terms of the guaranteed money that he's going to get in this deal. But Terry's the exact kind of player that the Commanders in their front office claim that they want. And this has kind of been my thing all along is like, I just don't understand how this deal isn't getting done because it makes so much deal to get done. Terry is all about all of the things that Dan Quinn and Adam Peters brought to the franchise. The franchise is all about all the things Terry represents. They took to each other extraordinarily well. He was productive on the field. I know he's 30, but it's not like he's 35 or dead. And for those reasons, I feel like it's really important for the Commanders. Not like it's important, I guess, for Adam to be like, I'm not going to be a pushover in his first major contract extension. All due respect to Sam Cosmi, which was significant, but not as high profile as this. But also, I think it's important to say, like, we reward guys who do the stuff that we want. And I guess in that way, like, I'm kind of Team Terry. But I also think that there's a possibility that the Commanders have offered a perfectly fair contract, and Terry's representation is like, we know how much you need us. We know where fan sentiment is. We're going to hold out for a little bit more. And in that case, I would be Team Commanders.
Do you think Jaden's ability to elevate the talent around him sort of kind of hurts Terry in these negotiations. And I'm not saying Terry isn't deserving of a massive contract. I definitely think he is. Finally, got a good quarterback, broke the team franchise record in touchdowns for a season. Like, he is more than deserving now that he has a good quarterback. But do you think Jaden Daniels being here and being able to, do what he did and be as productive as he was last year with guys like Olamide, and it's no shade to the guys that I'm about to mention, but they were like, wide receiver 3s, wide receiver 4s on other teams, and then you come here to Washington and you seem like you could, be a viable option as a wide receiver 2 because, we have this guy in Jaden Daniels kind of thing.
I think that it probably does hurt him a little bit. I think if you ignore how good Terry is, you weren't paying attention. That's kind of how I would answer that, right? Of course, it matters that Jaden can elevate, and they might think that some of the guys they have can produce at a really high level if they're given the opportunities. Terry last year was targeted 117 times. So what happens if you give, Debo's already going to eat into the target share a little bit because there's very specific stuff that's going to be designed for him. And then the problem is part like who else, but like, if you give Gallup and Noah Brown and whatever some of the targets that Terry got that you can get equal production are close enough, like I guess that's a calculation you can make, but I think Terry made Jaden's job a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Terry proved his value and that like all those other guys got to eat in part because Terry occupied real number 1 receiver type of coverage. Like teams had to pay attention. And the games that the Commanders were more successful offensively typically were ones that Terry McLaurin had a big impact on. And that's always a funky statistical conversation because it's like, okay, well, why wasn't he more involved in the bad games? Like, is it because he was not open or was he not involved enough in the offense? But like when they started to really make an effort to get the ball to him 3 weeks into the season, their whole offense changed. And if you look at some of the underlying data, I just pulled up NFL Pro and did a quick search of receiving EPA, like total EPA, so estimated points added on receptions last year. Terry was second in the league. Now, I will say, Amon-Ra St. Brown was so far away from everybody else, it's a joke. Terry, we played this game a little bit yesterday, Anthony. Terry's 69.4 estimated points added receiving last year. What's Amon-Ra St. Brown? Again, Terry's number 69.4. I'll tell you, Jamar Chase is in third at 66.3.
Amon-Ra, 82.7.
95.1.
Oh, my God.
That is
what?
Absolutely preposterous in terms
95.
of how valuable Amon-Ra St. Brown is. So also to anyone who's like, give him the St. Brown contract. They're different players, but like, y'all got to realize, put some respect on Amon-Ra St. Brown's name. But I think it's worth mentioning. Like, Terry had more touchdowns last year. Bigger yards per reception, in part because Amon-Ra does a lot of work in the slot. Targeted 117 times versus 141. Terry only had 82 catches to St. Brown's 115. But Terry had 1,096 yards. St. Brown 1,263. So yardage-wise, they're 150 yards apart at the end of it all. And Terry ran 58 fewer routes on the season. So point is, like, Terry's awesome. And he should be paid in a way that represents that he's awesome. What that number is I think the number up for dispute. And until I know more about what numbers each side is throwing, it's kind of hard to say what quote-unquote team I'm on.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.